Welcome back to Gene and Roger Talk Movies.
Yes.
We're overjoyed, of course, because friend of the show, Scott Eggleston, is back with us, director of Bad Bones and the upcoming Theater of Pain. And actually, before we get started, Scott, where are you at with the post-production on that?
Well, I've been held up a bit due to computer problems. So I'm actually building a new computer this weekend.
You have problems in the filming. There are issues coming up.
Well,
in the making of your film.
Not like this movie we're about to discuss, but sure.
Yeah, this movie is all about the destruction of the cinematic process.
Wow. It's a good metaphor, yeah.
Yeah, it is good that you're bringing up some production problems because the film we're talking about today is The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1996.
Laserdisc version.
Yeah, it's a collector's item right there.
Well, I don't know how much of a collector's item it is, but yeah, of course, have to dig out the Laserdisc anytime we're talking about a movie that I have the Laserdisc of.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciate Scott talking about some production issues because, of course, this movie is infamous for maybe one of the biggest production problem films ever. But let's get right in. Gene, where are you at with Island of Dr. Moreau?
Oh my gosh, where do you start? It's like, I think they had a great idea. I've not read the Jules Verne book, but the guy...
H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells, sorry, H.G. Wells, yeah. Have not gone over that, but... They have some interesting themes here. The whole idea of like a human, like or a whole idea of self-doubt. And I've heard this quote, and the quote goes, "It's like the strongest human belief is our self-doubt." And so I think this movie gets into that. So like at the very end, the creatures kind of like their ideas, asking, "Well, who am I? What am I?" You know, it's like trying to identify who you are, and I think every one of us on some level goes through that at some time in our life. So I admire their effort to try to explore this topic. So, but overall, this movie just is terrible. This is an awful movie. It just like fails on every respect, and I just got to say that this is not a horror comedy on any level. But yet, when Michael Myers watches this movie and he comes up with the idea for Mini-Me from this movie, yeah, there's that. I think that just says everything you got to know. I don't know, Mike. I might be done now.
In the show there.
Scott, well, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next week. Scott, what's your thoughts?
Well, I had heard a lot about this movie. I don't think I saw it when it first came out, and I don't think I'd seen it completely.
Nobody did.
So this is like the first time I think I've seen the whole thing. Yeah, it didn't do well in the box office, but I didn't hate this movie. I didn't love it either. I think, to borrow a quote I heard from another review of another movie, somebody said once, "This is an interesting mixture of an unhappy mixture of some interesting scenes," which I thought was appropriate for this movie, because some things I really liked about this movie. I thought that was the hook at the end of the first act where the protagonist walks in on the birth, what's going on. That's a pretty effective horror scene. And then later you got stuff with these CGI rats that it's just bottom of the barrel bad. Then you've got Marlon Brando and doing his Marlon Brando thing, which I have to admit, even though he's a pain in the butt to work with, apparently he's a pretty compelling on-screen presence. I have to give him credit for that. Would I work with him? Never.
Well, and luckily you won't have the chance.
Right.
Yes, those days are past.
And of course, so the movie was okay for me. I didn't think, I heard people saying, especially in the credits of this documentary I watched about this movie, saying, they've been associated with one of the worst movies ever made. This isn't one of the worst movies ever made. It has stuff in it. It's a professionally made film with one of the great directors, in my opinion, John Frankenheimer, who stepped in to direct this movie.
Save the film.
To save the movie. I'm a big fan of his, even though he's apparently a jerk to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Really? But yeah, we can talk about that more. But so it's kind of a mixed bag for me. I didn't hate it. I was never bored.
Right.
So there's that. But it's kind of a mess. I have to admit that it doesn't really gel, in my opinion.
So, of course, it's me. I love this movie. I saw this movie opening day at the theater.
Oh, really? Oh.
And you guys all know me. If the movie is completely chaotic and just is all over the place, and I think coupled with the horrendous backstory of the production of this, one of the beautiful things I like about this movie is the opening credit scene by Kyle. Was it Kyle Cooper that did that? Who also
when they're on the raft?
No,
No,
it's the
when the
montage.
credits
all the,
itself.
All the montage of all the imagery.
The title
Okay.
credits.
Cells and
Which is the same guy who gained fame for the credit sequence of Seven.
that makes
But
sense.
I think the chaotic nature of the credits here not only are indicative of the chaotic backstory of the production, but also the very nature of this film itself. Because Scott is right. Scenes just randomly happen. And so I'm assuming they were just doing everything they can to get to the finish line of this movie and just let's get the hell out of here. Yeah. And then in editing, it's like, well, we don't really have an explanation as to from this scene to this scene, but we're just going for it.
Yeah,
and,
they were making script revisions on the fly.
Yes. And so I really have a fondness for this movie. I love the special effects from Stan Winston. The makeup effects are just awesome. Great. And it's just chaos, and Val Kilmer doesn't want to be there. Marlon Brando doesn't want to be there.
Val Kilmer doesn't want to be
there.
John
Frankenheimer doesn't want to be there.
And do you know why Val Kilmer didn't want to be there?
Well, like we were talking about this movie before we hit play, but it seems like there was like the gods, which is a theme in this movie, is they just didn't want this movie to be made because Marlon Brando, his daughter committed suicide on the verge of this being made. Val Kilmer, his wife, filed for divorce. Joanne Whaley filed for divorce just as the movie was about to get going. So, yeah, I could see that these guys, their minds are in a different place for sure, and they're like both damaged individuals, and they're. Especially, I think Val Kilmer. Val Kilmer's just his mind.
Well, I found it interesting that this documentary that I watched called Lost Soul. Basically, the crew that interviewed said that these guys were trying to tank the movie. They were doing everything in their power to make it not happen. They would not, like Kilmer would not come out of his trailer until Brando did, and Brando wouldn't come out of his trailer until Kilmer did, and it was just a big power thing. And the original director left the project because he was getting bullied by Kilmer.
Well, he got fired.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, New Line Cinema canned him.
Yeah, and the backstory with Richard Stanley, of course, that documentary Scott's talking about is really exclusively from Richard Stanley's kind of viewpoint. Yeah. And he's an interesting person. He's directed Hardware and Dust Devil, and then recently got to direct again Color Out of Space.
Did he?
H.P. Lovecraft, Nicolas Cage movie, which you might check out sometime. But he was fired 3 days in. The studio, I don't think, ever really wanted him. The only reason this got made was he wrote the original script, which is not what you see in this movie anymore. Yeah. And he was somehow able to entice Brando to sign up for this movie, which then actually brought Bruce Willis and James Woods. Oh, yeah. And so there was this whole other cast that was supposed to happen.
There was, but none of them worked out. Again, Bruce Willis was getting a divorce from his wife. Right. So right as this was starting, right.
And so 3 days into the original production of this film, Richard Stanley gets canned. Marlon Brando had left the set to deal with the suicide of his daughter, and so they're trying to film around any Brando scene, which he's not really in this movie a whole bunch anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And amazingly, he dies like halfway through.
They only had him for 2 weeks, apparently.
Yeah.
2 weeks
and
of shooting.
So... it was just chaos from the get-go with this movie. They bring in John Frankenheimer, well-respected, I'm not taking any guff from anybody director, to just kind of force this movie to completion. Brando doesn't care. There's a great story about how, of course, back from the Godfather days where I'm not learning any lines, just tape a cue card on somebody. And you can actually see that when he's reading his lines, because there's a great scene at a dinner scene where all his little creations, his family are around him, and David Thewlis is there, and he's glancing down at the table and then going on with more dialogue, and you can just see how
he apparently had an earpiece,
and he had an earpiece as well, and so just crazy. But the movie is nice to look at. There's great special effects as far as the makeup goes. The chaotic nature of the film I really enjoy. I agree with Scott. It's never boring because they don't give it any time to really be boring.
Yeah, it feels hacked. It feels scenes just end, for no reason, and they seem really short.
Well, and just the scene where David Thewlis kind of escapes the compound for a second, or his little room, because he gets locked in his room and he gets out.
Val Kilmer locks him in.
You don't even understand what is that magazine that he's got on the floor. That apparently meant something more than it did. Then he walks down, he sees Brando watching watching TV or something. I don't remember what Brando was doing. But then the very next scene, he's in that lab somehow watching that birth sequence.
Oh, right.
And so it's just really a choppy narrative for sure, because they just didn't have the footage to throw in there. And they were just like, get out of here. And the great line from Frankenheimer was, as soon as Val Kilmer's scenes were done, he basically said, get the hell off my set.
Right. They were just
There was no
Yeah,
reshoots with Val Kilmer.
Antagonism for sure.
Yeah.
No, this movie's just, I just hated it. Because there's no characters in this movie.
Nobody's
the
developed,
characters.
for sure,
The characters die off quickly. Like these guys, right? The main should be the main people. They die off quickly. There's a major character here. This woman here, she is killed without a resolution for her character, and so the movie is just like, why even watch it?
Interesting, going back to like you were talking about the cast that was first involved. Apparently, like James Woods was the Val Kilmer character, and Val Kilmer was the David Thewlis character. And what I didn't understand is if you're going to make Kilmer into the sidekick of the Brando character, why not let James Woods be the lead? Instead, they get David Thewlis, who's sort of a weak protagonist, if anything. I mean, I didn't really care for him all that much.
Right. You just didn't buy into him.
Well, but I think you kind of had to have the weakness with that character coming onto the island. I think James Woods, just facially, he does not fit.
It's too manic,
he's too strong, maybe, where... Yeah, I'm not putting up with this. David Thewlis comes across as a little meeker,
true,
and would kind of allow himself to get kind of in this thing. But again, they set him up kind of as this meeker character. But then there's the great scene where he's basically to Marlon Brando's face, and with all of his monstrous creations around him saying, "You're like an abomination. What are you doing?" Creating all this stuff, which I think is a hilarious scene. Not meant to be hilarious, but I just think it's great, because how many times do you ever see a scene like that where here's the people you're criticizing right here. You have no power here at all.
Well, he's got the gun. They gave him a gun he was running around with.
Gave him a gun for some
and
reason.
you're just condemning them all, and just a crazy thing.
I mean, watch it for fun, to get a laugh, like when Marlon Brando has he always complaining about the heat, and he's allergic to the sun, so he lathers himself in this suntan lotion. It covers his whole body. It's covered with linen. Yeah,
he knows how to make an entrance. Every time you see Brando in any movie for the first time, you're like, wow, that's.
But he's wearing some kind of hat. Yeah. And the girl, who's actually another creature that he's created, but she looks very human. Yeah. She puts like water on top of the hat.
Ice
on top of the hat. I guess it's the way to cool him down.
Mm-hmm. But that was Brando's idea, apparently.
It was.
He has a metal cylinder on his head. It's the most ridiculous thing. And while you're watching it, you're like, what in the world what is going on here?
Well, and I think Brando, though, was this, of course, revered actor, and he knew it, and he knew he could just get away with crap.
Oh my gosh.
And that's kind of what he was doing there. And just, he was in control.
In that documentary, I think they were one of the people that interviewed was the head of the studio or whatever, and they had said, they got Brando, and the guy's like, we just had Brando in a movie. He was awful to work with. Why are we putting him in another movie? And sure enough, he was awful to work with. It's. But I mean, his characters are quite entertaining. It was interesting. The documentary also talks about how he was still fascinated with the character of Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now, and this character is kind of similar. You kind of see this
same kind of setting as well.
Yeah, right. Which I thought was kind of funny, because that was a pretty impressive set they built in the middle of the jungle, which is apparently an hour away from everyone's hotel. But I always wondered, like, where's the power coming from in the middle of the jungle? They had lights, they had computers, they had everything, and it's like I didn't...
Well, Val Kilmer's character is kind of like the fix-it guy, because Marlon Brando asked him more than once, is like, are you going to fix this? So, of course, nothing gets fixed. And actually, Val Kilmer sabotages the radio, so the main guy can't call anybody.
Right.
And so... But I guess it's his job. But of course,
he does have his eccentric moments too. It's interesting though, watching this movie, is sometimes you can tell in a movie when people aren't getting along. But I didn't really feel that. I felt like everyone had their own character, and they were pretty solid. I didn't feel like a lot of tension between the characters. I actually stopped watching the documentary at one point because Fairuza Balk said, John Frankenheimer hated my guts, and I didn't know. She didn't know why, And but I didn't really feel that in the movie. So in that respect, I mean, Frankenheimer did pull it off. He did get the movie done.
Yeah.
It does have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's still a mess. And like I said, the CGI in this movie, the little they use it, is just distractingly awful when
And,
they have animals.
1996. It just
Yeah. Well, T2 was 1991. You know, I guess they got Stan Winston, but not ILM.
Right.
I don't know, but
Right.
but I do agree with you. Some of the costume, the makeup effects, because that one Beast Man, the main one, his lips are moving while he's talking, and that's pretty impressive practical effects. So
right. But I would say a little bit about Val Kilmer's kind of revenge on Marlon Brando, or some of that tension. I would bet the entire "I'm dressing up as Marlon Brando" scene was probably Kilmer's invention.
And then
jab
he
at
imitates
him.
and he talks like
because Brando's probably gone by that point. By the
Brando's
time-
already gone,
Yeah.
and so
Right.
Kilmer's
he
trying to.
dresses like him.
I like that actually.
I thought it was hilarious.
It's just funny, and it's so out of place for a movie like this. I mean,
But-
this movie could have been. I don't know. It'd be great if Stanley had the original director had somehow managed to stay on the project to see his vision, because he worked on this for like 4 years before
Right.
before New Line Cinema authorized it. And so, what was his vision? And he loved the H.G. Wells story. He knew it really well. Yeah, and so it would have been great to see his vision, because I'm sure it would have been much better than what this is.
Well, it would have had to have had a different cast, because he could not handle
Right.
Kilmer. That was pretty obvious from the outset. And when Brando showed up, I mean, who knows what that would have been like? But I think he was probably too inexperienced.
Agreed.
This is a big studio movie. He made
right.
in basically indie genre stuff.
Hardware and
before.
Dust Devil were little tiny films.
Right. So it takes. I mean, which is probably why they got Frankenheimer, a director known for handling huge egos. And by the way, I mean, Frankenheimer 2 years after this movie made Ronin, an awesome.
It's an awesome action movie. Yeah.
Yes, awesome action
Huge
movie.
budget, yeah.
Right. So, and again, had a successful career in the 60s. He made one of my favorite movies of all time, which was The Manchurian Candidate from 1962. Love that movie.
Yeah.
And he made Seconds during that period, and The Train, I think was another one. I mean, he's just really great
Birdman of
filmmaker.
Alcatraz, another Burt Lancaster movie.
Right, another one.
Yeah.
And it's interesting
love The
because
Train.
if you,
Yeah.
of course, like 2 years after this, then he made Reindeer Games.
Right.
But it's interesting if you're familiar with his visual style, because he loves wide-angle lenses. He'll put somebody in the foreground with a wide-angle lens so you can see people in the background, and they're all in focus. But the person in the foreground is completely distorted by the wide-angle lens, and you see that a lot in this movie. That visual technique.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it's interesting, Gene, you bring up Burt Lancaster, because he was in the second remake of Island of Dr. Moreau from
like
1977.
77.
Which I remember seeing that as a kid in the theater. I remember seeing that one, which has a way better ending. This movie
that
just sort of whimpers away in the end, and
Well, and there was nowhere more to go, right?
They were done.
Everybody wanted to get out of there. Do
They
we
just
have enough
wanted to
footage
go
to make a
home.
movie?
It was so
And,
hot.
Yeah.
Well, it was funny that the documentary, they said, I guess the people they were bringing in to work on it from the original crew, Frankenheimer's group, whatever, they had, they're looking at this map of Australia where they were at.
Queensland,
North Australia, I think.
And they said, this map of Australia had like a rain thing on it, like tell you where the most rain was. They said, now where are we shooting? There was one dot on this map. It was like the most intense rain. And that's exactly where they were shooting. And of course, I think a hurricane hit them while they were shooting this. And you should just stay away from the tropics or bodies of water when you're making a movie.
Or just realize you might be there for a year, right, to get the shots you need.
Oh, my gosh.
But I also think, Gene, you brought up a great point about, because we've talked about this before, how original visions get corrupted for whatever the reasons. In this case, it was Richard Stanley, sorry, we're firing you from the movie that you helped get greenlit.
Yeah.
Right, and it's your vision, it's your story.
And so it would be interesting to have seen what his thing would have looked like. Because I believe in that documentary, he does talk about how he was going for a much more visceral, kind of R-rated sort of deal with this film. And so it would have been nice to, what would it have been?
Yeah.
I still really enjoy what it is now, just because it is chaotic and just crazy, right? You're never bored. It's just crazy. Don't try to follow any sort of narrative. Gene is always talking about, are they acting like people? They're not given a chance really to act like people, because it's just such a
ridiculous.
Here's a scene and here's another scene where this is happening. Oh, you're going to be really upset in this scene for no apparent reason, and you're going to be freaking out in this scene for no known reason, because there's been no build up to why this would be happening. Val Kilmer suddenly is completely insane, dressing like Marlon Brando. I don't know how that happened. It just happens. And so it's a fun little movie for stuff like that.
Well, and then there's that little person that Brando apparently took a liking to, because they gave the little person, there was another character who was supposed to be kind of one of his sons, who was there a lot of the time. And they basically gave his part to the other guy. And the actor who got originally was like, I had this kind of decent role, and all of a sudden I'm like barely in the movie.
Right.
You're talking about Mini-Me?
Yes. Yeah. Who is a compelling visual presence,
You
especially
just
with the
watch
huge
this
Brando,
movie.
and you got this
Right.
little man next to
Yeah.
Brando.
Oh,
Yeah,
For
watch
sure.
this movie,
But-
and that guy is his Mini-Me. It's right there, and it's like...
But again, it's Brando tampering with the movie, where he says, I like this guy better. We'll give him all the lines, and
Well, it's
give him
Brando.
all the
More
scenes.
scenes with him.
Right.
Probably the best scene...
Directors
Sorry.
love that, by the way, when actors take over.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, sure. That's why you don't work with egos like that. I mean, I couldn't. I don't know how anybody else would.
Well, I don't know. I
Yeah,
think
'cause-
for some actors, though, I like it when they are challenging a director or a screenwriter with lines like, my character wouldn't do that.
Well, that's collaboration. That's,
Right.
I understand that.
And
but
so I appreciate that. But when you're going the road these guys were going...
Yeah, they're taking it over.
Why? And like somebody like Val Kilmer, who desperately wanted to get out of there, the quickest way to get out of there is mind your business, shoot your scenes, and get out of there.
Right.
And you're wasting days and days and days by not coming out of your trailer until Brando comes out of his trailer. And of course, you can't challenge Brando because he'll never come out of his trailer.
It's
And
Brando.
Who's more eccentric?
You know,
Who's
you just
gonna win?
you just have to get the movie in the can and then you're out of there. So they wasted a lot of time just for no real reason.
Yeah. It's a lot of selfishness too, because Brando would stay in his trailer, and then all these people were in the fantastic Stan Winston makeup gear, but it's heavy. They're in a tropical climate. It's hot. So all these people in heavy costumes are just waiting hours in
He didn't
sweltering
care. He didn't
heat,
No.
waiting for him just to come out of his trailer. Yeah. So
Right, but I think
Everyone
that,
hated this movie.
you know, to Brando's credit, though, by doing that, it of course makes those intense scenes of them raging and rampaging probably better because they
Yeah,
really
'cause
probably
they really-
Yeah.
they
were pretty
really-
pissed.
They had a lot of hatred in their heart.
Did you guys also hear the story of Richard Stanley like snuck back onto the set
Yes.
in full mask, so
Yeah.
nobody knew who he was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and they had fired all the people that even would have known him by that time,
True.
except for the main actors, and so he could do it.
Yeah, I
and he
heard
did
that
it.
some of the support staff recognized him, but you know.
Well, so they noticed like that he would never take his mask off, and he had an unusual accent. Is what in the documentary they talk about that, which I think is incredibly funny. Like, everybody's like mask off, eating and everything. There's this one guy in the
Right.
background not doing anything.
Yeah.
A little suspicious, but
We wanted to pull out a movie because Val Kilmer, of course, recently passed
Yes.
away, and there's tons of retrospectives on Tombstone and Heat and quality movies that Val Kilmer has done. Top Gun, and no one's talking about Island of Dr. Moreau
Top
for
Secret,
some
yeah,
reason.
Top Secret.
And so we had to dig out Island of Dr. Moreau, which is probably the only film of his that actually fits the profile of our show. But his performance is fine. It's chaotic. It's crazy. He doesn't want to be there. You can tell he doesn't want to be there. There's a great behind-the-scenes thing on the Blu-ray, if you have it, where I actually think he was really high when he was giving that interview. Yeah, nobody wanted to be there. And this is the movie you end up with. And I do like the fact that we've traveled down the road now of the Mutations, Freaks,
yeah.
Island of Dr. Moreau. We're
There's
kind
a
of
theme here, yeah.
we have inadvertently stumbled across a theme, which we do sometimes. But this is another one that fits into those of these mad scientists creating some sort of thing that why are you even doing it? I
Weird
love
creatures,
Brando's
yeah.
explanation as to why he's doing it. It makes no sense, which is beautiful. It's right in there with Donald Pleasance in Mutations.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense what you're doing.
Right.
You're just a mad, crazy person who can do things, and you're doing it.
Yeah, this movie and that movie, Mutations, because it's kind of on the same plane. Like the
Well,
evil
see,
sign,
but
evil-
I will say though the mutations can get away with being camp because it's an indie movie with not what $1 million budget.
Right.
This had like a $30 million budget.
right.
You can't really. It's not as easy to forgive a movie like this because they have all those resources.
Right.
So they should.
Well, the director of Mutations probably did reach out to Marlon Brando, who said no. He had to settle with Donald Pleasence.
Oh, yeah. That's too bad.
So, Gene,
Yeah.
is there anything more to talk about with Island
No.
of Dr. Moreau?
I'd say watch this movie at your own peril. Yeah, you're not going to like it.
It's not that
I know
bad.
Roger's great. It's a great friend. We do the show, but yeah, sometimes we disagree.
I'm sort of
We're
in
disagreeing
between
here.
you guys.
Yeah, you
literally
are.
and
There's a continuum here. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's
Pure
a,
negativity. You're kind of in the middle. You really like it.
I love this movie.
there,
You even used the word love.
I do.
That's
When I was
amazing.
at the theater opening day, a older gentleman had brought his young child in
Ugh.
And they left.
at the opening credit sequence because it was so loud and
So intense.
bombastic and intense. He had to take the kid out, and then when the music toned down, he brought him back in.
Oh, so they came back. Okay.
Yeah, no, I have this movie brings me great joy on many levels, primarily because it's just chaotic and out there, and I love movies.
a lot of
like
good
that.
pyro in the third act. Too.
Yeah,
Everything
they're
explodes
blowing
in this
everything
movie.
up. Yeah.
Which is another thing I thought was funny is how all these beastmen all of a sudden know how to use explosives and firearms.
Well, they weren't all that good with the firearms because they were
That's
kind of
true.
randomly shooting things.
Which brings up another question: why do you have this huge armory on this island? You're trying to control the population of beast people.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
It just reminded me of when the creatures had their M16s with extended magazines and they were just blasting away. It kind of reminded me of the movie Conquest of the Planet of the Apes.
Oh yeah, that did remind me.
Because
of Planet of the
everyone's
Apes, too,
creatures and they all have M16s and they're just blasting, but they're blasting away humans. So I
Yeah.
guess that's
Okay,
the difference.
yeah.
They're not blasting other creatures.
Yeah. Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and Conquest of the Planet of the Apes is another lost classic because the original cut of that had to be trimmed back because of the tremendous amount of violence in that. film.
Really,
It's a huge body count.
that was in the '70s, right?
Yeah.
No, classic.
So
they-
Love the '70s.
Yeah, but Scott, anything more about Island of Dr. Moreau?
Like I said, I didn't love it, didn't hate it. I can feel your affection for the movie though, because there is a lot to like about the movie. I will admit, like I was there were some things in here that had some untapped potential that they glossed over.
Oh yeah.
That I noticed
A lot.
from the last version of this in the '70s that they did use. Like for example, at one point in the movie, I think toward the end, the main character realizes he's been tampered with. You know that
Right.
they've taken some of his DNA or done something to him, and then it's just sort of forgotten about.
Right.
You know, like they.
Well, they talk about that because that was an attempt to fix the girl because she was regressing from her humanity. She's growing teeth and stuff.
Is that what they said?
Yeah,
don't
I think
remember.
they alluded that into the movie.
One
That was an
line of
attempt to
dialogue
save
where he
Yeah.
says that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like in the previous version, the Michael York character who plays the protagonist starts to turn into a beast guy, which I'm assuming is part of the original story. I don't know. I've also heard Island of Lost Souls, the original one, is a
Right.
1932 pre-code movie.
Uh-huh.
Apparently, is
For a
a
lot-
good version of this, which I have not seen.
Yeah,
So
it's
maybe we should see that.
It's good. Remember, though, Gene, it's 1930s, so you're going to get
Freaks,
some of
yeah.
that Freaks vibe of a lot of melodrama and stuff like that. To me, this version, this 1996 version with Brando and Val Kilmer, is the ultimate realization of what you can do with this movie. I actually don't like the 77 version
okay.
at all. And the original Island of Lost Souls, of course, it's fine, but it's also almost 100 years old at this point.
So you're calling this a kind of an imperfect classic, or just a?
I really love this movie. I mean,
Okay.
I have not just
There's
the
that
laser
word again,
disc,
love.
but I also have the Blu-ray. So
Okay.
I,
You're
Yeah,
a
you have
fan.
this.
I'm not
and
playing.
this.
Yeah, when I have the laser disc of the movie, you know it's a movie on my I love this movie. And
Yeah.
again, it's not a good movie. So don't confuse what I'm
Yeah.
saying. For people that have seen a lot of movies, here's one you haven't seen, and it's going to bring you probably a lot of joy because of the chaotic nature and just nothing is making sense. And, scenes just go into another scene with no explanation as to why it's happening. Major plot points that would be more thoroughly developed and played out are not. It's just great.
Yeah, I
there you
guess
go. Yeah.
final word is like I echo you guys is that this movie could have been. There are a lot of great themes. Again, that theme of like finding yourself, finding a discovery. There's these topics of like God, who is God, deities, And there's also, but it's just, I'm going to say I'm going to hate this movie. It's because the characters don't go anywhere. These guys are killed off quickly. And actually, the only character that you like is this girl. And then it would have been great to explore maybe her transformation as like as she digresses into a more animalistic. Does she finally come to an acceptance? There seems to be at the end of the movie, there's an acceptance of the creatures that there's going to be no cure. There's going to be no serum for us. We just kind of have to accept who we are. Which in a way is kind of a great message for all of us. But it would have been great to find out what was her evolution. But no, she's randomly just killed off three quarters of the way through for no reason whatsoever. Yeah, this movie.
Well, I thought it was interesting too that one of the character, I think the character that does kill her says, like, father used to beat me and he never touched you, and we never see him beat that guy getting beaten.
Right.
So it was kind of, I wonder, like, why is this character so, I thought he was part of the inner circle of family members, and all of a sudden he's the ringleader trying to kill everyone, and there was no motivation for that, but.
Yeah.
Right. Again, could have been a lot better. Right there.
It's true.
Well, and again, it was, we've got to finish this movie as quickly as possible to get out of here.
Yes.
And,
true.
So all these plot points just, and that's what I'm saying. Why did he just suddenly decide that Marlon Brando was his enemy and had been beating him when all you've seen from Brando is basically care and concern for these inner circle people? So just love this movie for reasons just like Scott said.
Well, they have that great conflict. What you said is that he expresses care and concern, but also he has implanted into each one of them the chip. And he has the remote control, and you just press a button, and all of a sudden, all of them fall into just unbelievable pain, which kind of reminds me of a Star Trek episode. But so, and so, how is that love and caring? You carry it around with you, so it's an existential threat. Just I got to behave, or he's going to hit the pain switch. It's like. There's no love there.
Well, but I would refer to the scene when they are talking about, because there's the sayer of the law, who's one of the
Ron
creatures,
Perlman,
right? And he's talking about you can't kill and all this stuff, and one of the creatures kills another living thing, and
bunny,
and Brando at that point
just comical.
Is basically absolving him of that crime,
right?
And so that's what I'm saying about the caring, is he is trying to do something to bring these creatures into more of a human kind of thought process and trying to keep them from devolving totally to animal. But that's part of his madness, right? That's his mad scientist stuff, which is great. So I love this movie.
Well, we'll have two copies of it even.
I know. We'll have
and I have a VHS as well.
Three.
Yeah.
Three copies.
The VHS.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. But, Gene, any plans for next week?
Well, I'm not going to be out of town next week.
Oh.
Yeah, so I won't be here. Maybe we could.
Wow.
You and Scott could do something.
Well, that's interesting, because Scott was talking about the Jenny Penn movie. What was Rule of Jenny Penn with John Lithgow and Jeffrey Rush, which I just saw on Tuesday. Scott has not seen it yet. Oh, it's brand new.
Yeah,
it just left the theater.
It was not showing in the theaters here, because I did look for it, and it didn't have a screen.
So you guys had to rent it? You had to rent it?
No, I have. Of course, I have my subscription up to date on Shudder, which you canceled.
Yeah, that's a different topic.
This is a horror film podcast, right?
But so you're basically saying either Scott and I are going to do some sort of film, or we're just going to have a week off.
Well,
because I might be out of town next week, actually. So
it might. Well, you know what? It might just be Roger Talks Movies next week.
Or you could bring in we haven't had Tyken on for a while.
No, we haven't. Right.
Yeah,
but anyway, Scott, thanks so much for coming on. We always love having you.
Thank you for having me.
And when is the release date of Theater of Pain?
The goal is June, but that might not happen. We'll see. I'm building the computer right now to replace my old one.
Talking about his production problems.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Post-production. So
definitely look forward
this summer,
to seeing that when summer. No pressure, Scott.
Okay.
No pressure. Take your time.
Okay.
Because you're kind of like the Stanley Kubrick of independent filmmakers, really, when you really break it down.
Of Anchorage.
We'll be maybe back next week, but more than likely it'll be 2 weeks when we can get the whole crew back together. But I will maybe reach out to Tyken and see if he wants to do something or whatever.
I'm not sure I won't be here, but I'm just
Okay.
letting you know
well,
it's
yeah,
possible.
we won't
Well,
do Jenny Penn next week.
I'm just down in Girdwood, but I'm not here.
right.
Our
So,
little studio.
but I think we should do the Jenny Penn. I'm the only one that has seen it, so
And I brought it up, so
Yeah.
I have to watch it.
we can certainly do that at some point. But anyway, I'm
Interesting.
rambling now.
And this is a modern movie. Okay.
Dude, it's brand new. It
Brand
was
new?
at the theater in 2025, which is this year.
Wow.
And I
Okay.
mentioned it to you, and I think you've actually maybe seen the trailer. It's
I have no memory of
okay.
this.
The old guys in the convalescent home.
Hagsploitation, what you call it?
Nah, that's a good. Yeah.
Except with men.
Okay.
I
Anyway,
have no memory. Sorry.
we're gonna leave now. So we will
Yes.
see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. Bye bye.
Bye.